Okay, we are going to go over the APA style paper. We will look at the sections that are required in the APA paper. I am going to give you some hints and some tips as we go through, things that have helped me out with papers that I've done, and also some guidance that I received from other professors that have provided the ability for me to write much better, and I hope this helps you out. The paper will be sent to you that you are looking at as a PDF, so you will have a document to look at as we go through the video. So with that, let's jump right in. First of all, the format. At the very top of the paper, you see the word running head. You see it's followed by a colon and then the name of the paper. You have 50 characters that you can put in for the name of your paper. So if this paper said analysis of onion routing in a patriotic society of America, making it great again, well, you're not going to be able to put all that in. So you're going to have to reduce it to something. What I have learned to do is keep my paper titles to a length that will fit in the header at the top of the paper. The actual name of the paper is all in capital letters. You will then see to the right, on the far right, justified, the page number. This is different than all the other pages, so you can check different than other pages in your Word so that the running head does not appear all the way through your document. The running head only appears on the first page. Moving down into the center of the document, this is our information about our paper. What the name of the paper is, your name, the college name, my name, and then CYB 673. Some may require you to put in the full name of the course. I'm only going to require you to put in the number for the course. That is a style issue. That's not a format issue. The requirement is a identifier for the course, and then the date. And this should be the date that you finish the paper, not the day you start the paper, not the day you're working on the paper, but the day you finish the paper. And that gives me an understanding of when or how long it took you to do your paper. Then we have the author's note. The author's note is a place where you can free text something to me, to the reader, explanation of something that you want us to know that will not be considered in the paper. For example, in this one, it states this paper is a combination of papers written by Utica students William Hungok and Brian Greer, corrected and appended by Professor Stephen Pearson. That's the note to you to let you know that other people contributed to this work. This wasn't all my work. I was editing it and correcting it, and I put in some new paragraphs and some other styles, but the majority of the work was done by William and Brian. So I want to make sure they get credit for the research they did on this paper. Moving on to page 2. Notice that we do not have an abstract or table of contents. These are short papers. Since they are short papers, under 30 pages, the abstract and the title or table of contents really are not required. The table of contents will come in later on when you're doing larger papers, when you're doing your capstone, etc. You will do a table of contents. You will be using your headings. And the nice thing is if you learn now how to do a heading 1, heading 2, the table of contents will build from the heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 in your, or automatically in your Word document. It's one of the tools. At the very top, analysis of onion routing. This is going to run across every page. The analysis of onion routing is the name of the paper. It should match what you put in the running head. Notice that running head no longer appears. Page number is justified to the right in the upper right hand corner. We start out our introduction with the name of our document. What do we want to say? So this one says hiding in plain sight. So I've changed the name from the actual paper name, and I've given it something to kind of intrigue the reader a little bit. And you're more than capable, or more, you're allowed to do that, and it's not an issue. So it says, since the inception of the internet, personal freedom has always been at the forefront of developers' minds. Okay, we're throwing a hook in there. Anonymity and privacy embody the principle of personal liberty. So I'm trying to get you to want to read my paper. I want to give you a little bit of a hook. So hiding in plain sight is a reference to what it is that I'm ultimately going to talk about. It's heading 1, it's centered, and it's bolded. Then I start my introduction, and notice my introduction is very short, it's concise, and all I'm doing in this introduction is getting you to read my paper. The introduction ends with my research question that I want you to know that I'm going to answer. So at the bottom paragraph here, it says, a belief exists in the criminal community that investigative government agencies cannot track Tor. This paper will argue that investigative government agencies can track Tor. That's my purpose of my paper. That's the question I'm going to answer. Can we track Tor? I'm going to say yes, we can track Tor. This could be rewritten. You could say this paper will argue the possibility of tracking, but they chose to make it definitive, and they are going to prove that you can track Tor using this paper. Now, if you're doing a hypothesis, obviously you would put in your H1 and H0, H1 being one way of the paper coming out and H0 being the other way the paper could come out. So it could say something like, this will prove or disprove the ability to track on the internet. Next, it gives it a path. This paper will begin with a literature review, followed by a discussion of exploits that can allow tracking of Tor, concluding with closing thoughts and recommendation for the future research. So if I'm looking at this statement here, this statement tells me why it's important, because the criminal community believes they are anonymous and they can get away with stuff. What I'm going to prove, which is, nope, they're not so anonymous, we can actually track them. And then I'm going to tell you how I'm going to prove it. I'm going to give you a literature review, then it's going to be followed by a discussion, and then it's going to be tied up into a nice package with my conclusion. So this bottom paragraph puts a nice little, basically a table of contents and how and why and all of that into one very clean little paragraph here. That's how we end the introduction. Now I'm going to move on to my literature review. And in my literature review, I start out the literature review, and notice that I used a in-text citation here. Hinduja 2007 argues that cybercrime investigation law enforcement seeks to attribute criminal act to a perpetrator based on digital evidence that can be obtained, usually evidence obtained from large log files or workstation server or network device that was utilized or comprised during illegal operation that is to be investigated, Taylor and Liederbach 2014. So I have two pieces here. The very first one, Hinduja 2007, argues that in cybercrime, and it ends at that can be obtained. That ends her basic input into my work. I've used that to base that first two sentences. The next part, usually the evidence is obtained, that's now going to be credited to Taylor, Fritsch, and Liederbach. So I've used two different methods here to cite. And the reason I want to do that is because I don't want to give Taylor and Fritsch and Liederbach the credit for that entire paragraph, because that's not correct. They didn't do that entire paragraph. All they did was the bottom two lines, and Hinduja, who did the top two lines. So I gave Hinduja an in-text citation at the top to allow that site, or to allow people to know that that's where I received that information to make that argument. Okay, so I start out my literature review with an in-text citation. Again, the literature review is a required piece. It says literature review at the top. The literature review is centered. It's a heading 1, and it's bold. And then I start out my literature review. Again, started out with an in-text citation, went through, and I'm going to give you what's called the literature review introduction. So I'm going to introduce you to what I'm going to talk about in my literature review. And this is going to be ended at the bottom here with a transitory or a transition, excuse me, not transitory, but a transitional uh, sentence or paragraph to get you into the next paragraph. So it says at the very bottom, to better understand Tor, this paper will first define the underlying architecture of onion routing. Now I'm saying I'm done talking about the introduction to Tor here. Now I'm moving into actually talking about the underlying technology, and here's my transition from one paragraph to another paragraph. Now at the very end of the document I left it one that was not transitioned so you can kind of see the difference. And you can see after you've read through and you get to that last one, you're like, wow, this really does make a difference. So now it's flowing nicely. I'm helping the reader understand the paragraphs, going from point to point. So now I start with onion routing. Notice that onion routing is to the left. It's not a heading 1. It's not a topic to itself. It is a subtopic of my literature review. So this is one of my components of my literature review. So it's a heading 2. It's left justified, bold, and on a line by itself. And in the onion, so this one says onion routing technology. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to explain what onion routing is all about. So this goes through and it talks about onion routing and how onion routing works. It's going to define onion routing. So this is basically my encyclopedia entry that I'm creating for onion routing, because I'm going to use this later on in my discussion as a part of the basis for my argument. So I'm defining those things for my argument later in my discussion in the literature review. This is all my background research. This is what I'm going to use in my actual argument. Okay, so now I get down to network insertion, and it says, now that we have discussed the underlying technology, we can focus our attention on flaws in the system that may allow investigators to track Tor users. Again, transition statement takes me from the onion routing, moves me into the next paragraph, which is network insertion. This is a flaw in the onion routing topology that allows me to take advantage of tracking somebody. So network insertion, that's covered. That leads us to traffic watermarking, which is another method of tracking, or possible method of tracking someone using Tor, and that leads to throughput fingerprinting, which is another one. If you notice here, as this is going through, it is very focused. Everything we've done so far supports that research question that we stated in the very beginning, which was, can you track someone on the Tor? Well, everything we've done to this point, except for the onion routing where we explain it, has defined methods of being able to track somebody. So I'm staying very focused, or this paper is staying very focused on those topics and those things. So the argument I'm creating is that, yeah, somebody can be tracked, and here's the methods that are being used. And right now what I'm doing is I'm giving you the literature that supports my discussion that's coming up on my topic or my question. So when you're defining these sections here, you've got to make sure you are in depth enough that you have something to use later on. So these encyclopedia entries you're making, make sure that you are defining and using research, the modern research that's out there. You're using other people's work to create these subtopics, and you are as definitive as you can be. Now, we're not going to be expansive here. We're not going to cover everything there is to know about throughput fingerprinting, but we are going to cover enough that's going to support your argument in your discussion. So you're going to be clear, and you're going to argue both sides. So if there's flaws here to this argument of throughput fingerprinting, you want to make sure you bring that in too. So the pros and cons would be weighed in each one of these subtopics. And again, the literature review is your understanding of how everything works. So when I get done reading the literature review, as your reader, I'm going to have an understanding of how everything works, but I'm also going to have an understanding that you know what you're talking about. You've laid out all of the definitive information for me to know that you are basically a technical expert in this subject. Once we get past that, and I'm now agreeing that you are a technical subject matter expert, we're going to get down to discussion of findings. So your findings are your literature review. What did you understand within the literature review? So now we're going to start the discussion of findings. It says onion routing employs a network of proxy hosts and forwarding traffic between a client and a server to anonymize its origin. To answer the question of whether it is possible for government agencies to track activities conducted using Tor, research was presented in the literature review that explores several weaknesses in the technology and its current implementation. We go right back to our question. This is a direct feedback to my question. I'm going to tell you in my discussion why it is, based on my literature review and all the documents that I've read, why it is possible. And this is where I'm going to synthesize everything together and build my argument or my defense of my statement in my initial part of my paper. So the discussion of findings is a topic to itself. It's a heading 1. It is a bold, centered. So you know that this is a new section. It's a required section. So we've had 3 required sections so far. You had your introduction, your literature review, and now discussion of findings. You're now going to discuss all of the things that support your argument. This is where you make your argument. And this is where some of you kind of got off track in some of the papers, the papers that were turned in, is you added new topics here. And you started deviating and your focus left what the paper, and it's very easy when you're writing a long paper to then start going off into other directions. That's why it's always very critical to always have that research question right there so you can look back at it and go, all right, stay focused, stay focused. It's kind of like that Star Wars guy when he's coming along to the Death Star and he's down there and he's say, stay on target, and you're going to shoot the missile into the tube. The exact same thing, all right? And I had to get a Star Wars thing in there because I am a sci-fi freak, so it is what it is. So anyways, so we have our discussion of findings. We start going through our discussion of findings, and again, the work is supporting everything that I'm trying to say. Now, if I want to do the cons in here, I do the cons in here, and I tell you, what my research would be challenged by. If there's something out there that says I am completely wrong here, I may want to put that in there, because in academic research, it's not about me proving my point, it's about me proving the truth. And if the truth is that there might be an opposing side, we'll put the opposing side in there. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so now my discussion is going to go down to my conclusion. This is our last component of the paper. You must have a conclusion. Again, it's a topic, so it's a heading 1. It's centered and bold. And the very beginning of this conclusion, it says, this paper has argued and shown that investigative government agencies possess resources and capability to track the Tor traffic. There you go. You've answered the question in your conclusion. You built a literature review with all of the back-end resources and all the back-end understanding and the technology, and then you have moved into your discussion where you've argued using your research, and in the conclusion, you're basically saying, see, I told you what I was going to prove, and I proved it. Now, if you don't prove it, well, you got to put that in there too. And it's if you had, say, agencies do not have the process or resources to track Tor, well, I want to know that too. Again, you're not there to provide a document that is anything but factual. Okay, the conclusion just wraps this up. So your conclusion is very short, but it's also a wrapper. So at the very end of our conclusion, we're going to have our future findings. So if you have some future findings, or if you have something you want me to go look up later on, you can add a sentence or a paragraph in here. You can put it in the end of your conclusion that says the creation of honeypot nodes on the internet should be of great interest to investigative government agencies. Future research is needed into this area, as the literature research during this paper illuminated a gap in this area. So what I'm telling you is there wasn't a whole lot of work done on honeypots and how to set up the network to allow these exploits and these flaws to be done. So therefore, there's room for a literature to be done that would support this. Okay, Now we come down to our very bottom, and I said the conclusion is basically the end of your paper, which it is. That's the end of your work. So the introduction, discussion, or excuse me, introduction, literature review, discussion, and conclusion, that's all the work that you're going to be doing. The last part is basically another admin, like the title page, and this is your reference section. The reference section is a topic, so it's bold, it's a heading 1, and what you got to look at and remember is there is a formatting structure for references. First of all, it's all alphabetical. So you see mine, it goes Carrier, Evans, Forte, Hinduja, and it goes all the way through, and they're all in alphabetical order. Secondly, when I review papers, I'm going to come to your references and I'm going to look at things such as, is this a journal? Is this a book? Is this a web page? Is this a blog? And if it's a web page or blog, I'm not going to count those as academic references because they're not academic references. If you have a paper that's on a blog, then go to the paper. Don't reference the blog that references the paper. Go to the paper and then cite the paper. Okay, and a couple people made that mistake in some papers, and then some other people just basically threw a mishmash of stuff there and said, here's my references. Well, that's great, but there is a very specific reason, because if I want to go check your resources, I need to know exactly where your resources came from. I also need to know where to go to get these resources so I can look at your documents to see if you have created a supporting argument based on real literature, or if you just made stuff up. Unless I can go check it, I can't validate that. So the first one here, Carrier and Spatford, Getting Physical with Digital Evidence Process. It was published in the International Journal of Digital Evidence. I know that journal, so I know that's an academic journal. And it was retrieved from psu.edu. So I'm confident that that is going to be an academic paper because it was retrieved from the correct source. Then we go down to the next one. This one was taken from the Usenix Security Symposium. Now, symposiums can be used as academic because they're given in an academic form. So I would need now to go to that website or that symposium, to that writing, and see if that speech or that presentation at the conference was actually a sponsored or non-sponsored event. So if this was a guest speaker coming in for the conference, that's okay. If this is Bob's security company and they're doing a marketing presentation basically to sell their new product and they're calling it a practical congestion attack on tour, well then that is a problem and I can't use that as academic. Then that becomes non-academic. Next one down, digital investigation, that's good. So you can go through and see very quickly which ones are journals and which ones aren't. They're very evident. 80% of all of your citations by rule at Utica have to be academic. So if you're looking at your citations and you go through and go, well, I've got one academic citation and I've got 16 websites, you're not going to make it. You have to have academic citations. Secondly, on a paper of this size, this is basically an 8-page paper, minimum, bare minimum academic journals, you should have 10 academic journals for a paper this size. Okay? If you have less than that, you're not going to have the resources or the level of information to be able to run an argument that covers both pro and con. 3, 4, and 5 papers, you're not going to get the depth of research you're going to want in an 8-page paper. A discussion post, 1, 2 resources, absolutely. But when you're starting to do your papers, make sure that you are in the realm of 10 academic articles. That way you know that you've got enough information for us to believe that what you're saying is correct. Okay. That brings us to the very end of the document. We have covered the major components: the title page, literature review, discussion, conclusion, references, Those are the components you have to have. The title page and references do not go to your page count, as you know from the instructions. This is an APA formatted paper. You could probably find some holes in here, and you could, once you start getting into APA, there are some things here maybe that I have missed in this paper, but this is a good solid example of an APA formatted research paper that you should be turning in for your future assignments. I hope this helps you out. I hope this will allow you to progress on with your research. And if you have any questions, you know that you can get a hold of me at any time. And I look forward to seeing you in the future weeks. Thank you.